Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Volunteering for Democracy, our latest webinar in the Nonprofit Vote series. I'm excited to have some great guest speakers today and to learn more about volunteering because our nonprofits, many of them run on volunteers, and so does democracy to a big extent. Real quickly, I am going to ask Kimberly if you can enable transcription, live transcription, so that folks can have closed captions or live captions for this webinar. Perfect, thank you. Okay. And for our agenda today, I'm going to start with some announcements. Then get into how you can encourage election-related volunteering. And then we have our guest speakers. So we'll start with our very own Caroline Mack to talk about her experience doing poll working. We'll then have Marta Hansen from Power the Polls talk about poll working, and Cannon Roberts from Rideshare to Vote Aware talking about their rideshare volunteering opportunities. As always, we will keep our Q&A box open and do a moderated question and answer at the end of the webinar. So please use that Q&A box if you have questions for our guest speakers. All right, so getting into our announcements, I was perusing Instagram the other day and came across a post by our good friends at National Voter Registration Day. And so thanks to them for this interesting stat. There are 435 House seats, 34 Senate seats, 36 governorships, 30 attorneys general, 27 secretaries of state, and 6,166 state legislators on ballots this year, this November. So it is a huge and hugely important election. Not to mention that there will be ballot measures in at least 35 states where voters can directly weigh in on issues including elections and voting policies, abortion access, legalizing marijuana, changing the minimum wage, taxes, and much more. So lots of issues for voters to weigh in on, and we need their opinions and voices at the ballot box. It's a little cut off here, but voter turnout was only 53% in 2018. And that was the highest turnout in 40 years. So it's cut off here, but it says in 4 decades. So that's the highest midterm turnout. So we want to make sure that we're only growing from that 53% number, that we're making sure that the people who work for our nonprofits, support our nonprofits, and receive services are being represented and aren't left behind this November. So it really, I think, puts in perspective how much is at stake and how much it matters that people really do turn out and vote. I think that's a good reminder. And there's not a ton of time left. We have 90 days to go. So there are some important dates that I want to make sure that you have on your calendar. So August 16th is Poll Worker Recruitment Day. You'll hear more about that in a bit. September 20th, National Voter Registration Day. October 3rd through 7th is Voter Education Week. October 28th is Vote Early Day. November 7th is Election Hero Day. And of course, November 8th is midterm elections. Now, does this sound like a lot? Yes, but don't worry, we've got you covered. Next slide. All of this information is in our election countdown calendar. So this is a 10-week countdown calendar starting with August 29th that week. And each week there's a different theme, and we have sample emails, sample Zoom chat posts, Facebook, Twitter, everything you'll need to use your communications channels to lift up voting and what voters need to know to be vote ready. So we'll send out these slides with all these links, but there's an actual plugin so you can put it directly into your Google Calendar or your iCal so that you never miss a week. All right, and I of course had to do some special shout outs for National Voter Registration Day. So first of all, do not wait to sign up as a partner if you have not done so already. When you sign up, you get free posters and stickers. And if there are folks on this call who participate in National Voter Registration Day, but typically don't sign up, maybe you don't need posters or stickers, I ask that you sign up regardless. We really need to track the growth and breadth of the holiday. So having you sign up lets us know how much participation there is. And it also means you'll get our follow-up survey so we can track just how many voter registrations are collected on September 20th. We're trying to hit the 5 million milestone this year. So that's why we're extra enthusiastic about getting that data. I believe we've recruited over 1,400 partners so far this year, and we want to get to 4,000. So be a part of that if you're not already signed up. Lastly, if you're not signed up, you are not going to be eligible for the event grants. So there are grants from $500 to $2,000 and up to 10 $5,000 grants for really big events. And the priority deadline is this Friday, but you actually have until the 26th. But you want to get that in ASAP, make sure you're signed up as a partner, and then submit that application. It's not very long, maybe just a page or two. If you want to celebrate National Voter Registration Day, but you don't plan on hosting an event, you can rock some merch from our online store. The store is open. So you see this black t-shirt. I am very excited to sport this on September 20th, commemorating our 10-year anniversary. And if you love webinars, which you must if you're here, there's a joint webinar on August 18th. So that's next Thursday. And it will feature folks from Snap, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and talking about how you can really lift up all the civic holidays that I mentioned earlier. All right, so that brings us to the final announcements, which are our next 2 webinars from Nonprofit Vote. So on August 24th, we have What's on the Ballot, talking about nonpartisan voter guides, both tips for creating your own and where to get ones that are already made so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Then we'll talk about comprehensive voter engagement and making meaningful connections on September 7th. And this webinar is more so geared towards organizations that are newer to voter engagement, but we'll be debuting some new materials, talking about some training best practices, and how you can combine that really important face-to-face, one-on-one voter interaction with some digital tools to make the bureaucratic part of voter engagement a little easier, like registering to vote or requesting a mail ballot or finding a polling place. All right, now we can get into our topic of the day, which is about volunteering. And I want to give you some ideas, things to think about around mobilizing your staff, supporters, and the people you serve to get involved in election-related volunteer opportunities. So we'll start with the why. Why do election volunteering? I think there are some specific benefits for many of our organizations, for our staff, the people we serve, and voters in the community. So you can demonstrate your commitment to democracy. For your staff, it's an opportunity to connect with community members and try something new. It's always nice to break out of the routine and get a new, fresh experience. It can also build people's interest in other civic engagement opportunities. For the people you serve, this can be an increased sense of community agency. You know, they're members of their community, helping their community, making sure they're represented. And for poll working, this is often a paid opportunity, so that can be really helpful for folks, especially who could use a little additional income. And lastly, I think it's also really important for the voters in your community so that they can get assistance from volunteers that share their backgrounds, experience, or maybe their language. So there's a multitude of benefits, and I'm sure my other guest speakers are going to touch on some of them, but I wanted to present a few to you here. And there's lots of options for volunteering. So you can volunteer as a poll worker or giving rides to the polls, which Marta and Cannon will speak to in a moment. But there's also volunteer opportunities around legal assistance and poll monitoring. So if you're a paralegal or a lawyer or a law student, election protection could really use your assistance helping voters. But if you do not have a legal background, they also need poll monitors. So you can go to election protection. There are two great organizations, Vote Riders and Spread the Vote, that are helping voters get IDs. So if you want to assist voters with getting the needed ID in order to vote, those are two great options. And then voter registration help. So League of Women Voters and When We All Vote are two really awesome organizations. And if you want to make it extra fun, I will recommend Headcount because they combine music and festivals with voter registration. So that could be an opportunity for your staff to get to see a concert from a musician that they're interested in while also helping out. So I just want to give you a couple tips for how to motivate people to volunteer. First, you want to make it very simple to do so. So make the request explicit, make sure people know they're being invited or asked to participate in volunteering, and make the instructions very clear for how they can sign up and what they're signing up for. When you're looking at volunteer opportunities, you might want to try to find opportunities with flexible or convenient timing so that it can work for your staff or people you serve. And if you can, consider providing time or space for volunteering. I'm going to talk about the time piece in a moment, but the space could be, if you have a conference room, you could have a couple folks come in to do phone banking. There are ways that you can use your space for volunteering, including volunteering to become a polling location. The other thing you want to do is really just make it fun and relevant and enticing. So highlighting opportunities that connect with your organization's mission or the skill set of the folks that you serve and are connected to your nonprofit. I think language access is the first one that comes to mind, but you could have other skills such as, legal background, or maybe somebody's really good at, getting folks to talk to them, really charismatic, or really good with data. There are all different kinds of volunteer positions that organizations need filled. You could create competitions or offer incentives to make it more exciting. And you could make it a group of effort that you discuss and come back to later so that you are really meaningfully integrating it to your organization's culture. So I mentioned time and time to volunteer. So if you're not familiar with Nonprofit Staff Vote, that is our initiative started in 2020 to get nonprofits offering paid time off for their employees to go and vote. There are many states that don't require paid time off to vote or don't have any rules regarding it, but nonprofits can step up and offer that time off. And we know many organizations go one step farther by offering PTO for election-related volunteering. So that could be on election day or in the weeks and months leading up to election day. If your organization has a volunteering policy or encourages people to volunteer in general already, see if you can sweeten the deal by making it paid time off and promoting election-related opportunities. So you can find more information on that at Nonprofit Staff Vote. Again, we will send all these links and slides out to everyone who attended the webinar. So I'm ready to step back and let our guest speakers take the stage. So I first want to introduce Caroline Mack, who has been with Nonprofit Vote since 2018 and is our evaluation and learning manager. So Caroline, please join us and enlighten us about your experience doing poll working.
Yeah, thanks for letting me share. I'll just share kind of a couple, kind of why I wanted to do it, what I learned from it, and why I'd do it again, maybe why I wouldn't do it again. So first, my first experience being around polling places was actually, I was, excuse me, I was part of a kind of observation research on like wait times in polling places for my professor in 2016. So I got to visit about 10 different polling places, and just to give you a sense, like I saw super dead, like out of the way, pretty far out polling places to like small polling places where volunteers would like cheer when like a young person voted, and it was just like really energetic. So like they were very different. I did not know what to expect going into it, but I knew I wanted to do it for two reasons. One, my work is about voting, so I really wanted to understand firsthand like what it was like. And then the second is actually pretty personal in that my mom's first time voting after being a citizen for like 30 years and maybe a resident in her neighborhood for like 20 years. She basically got sneered at by the people at the polling places, and just she did not have a good experience. So I like wanted to just be a helpful face, be someone who's like Asian, because that's not really common as poll workers. So just like wanted to see what it was like. So the presentation after us will tell you more about like how to sign up, but basically like it was about like 6:30 a.m. to like 9 p.m. Even though polls were only open from like 7 to 8, there was that like prep period beforehand. There was like counting and like all the QC quality control afterwards. I was working the check-in table, and basically people would like come in. I was next to someone. We had two books. I had like maybe A through M addresses, and the other person had like N through Z addresses. And so people would come in, and then I would just like, what's your address? Like check them in, check them off, and then be like, here's your ballot. Make sure they had the right ballot, direct them to the like where to vote. And then someone else on the kind of stationed at the polling place would then check them out, kind of give them that sticker, make sure they like submitted the ballot correctly. So that was basically what we had for however many hours that was, maybe like 14, 13, something like that. And you get like 1 hour break for like lunch or something, 1 hour break, maybe half an hour or something like that. We weren't allowed to have phones, but I did bring lots of snacks. I remember noting to myself next time I should bring like a seat pad because there's a lot of sitting. But basically, like in that time span, I took away a couple things. One, I like had a much greater appreciation for the massive logistical operation that this whole voting thing is. There's so many checks, there's so many people involved, there's so much equipment, there's so much documentation, and just so many like things happening all at once. I got to know my neighbor's name that I was too shy to ask for despite living there for 2 years. And I saw her vote. I was like, oh my gosh, I know your name because I'm checking you in right now. I became friends with the other volunteers that I would never have met otherwise. The polling place that I was at was a senior center. And so there were like a lot of people who'd been there in the area for a long time. They like knew about the different candidates. They were talking. They were like, yeah, like I kind of have a feel for who is going to win. There were also like wild stories, like one of the senior center people like pinched the mayor incumbent's butt. Like they were just like, yeah, you can't make this stuff up. It was just really cool to be in an environment I would literally never be in otherwise. And I also learned that people got like really confused. I was someone popped in, was like, "Hey, can I vote here? I like work upstairs." And we're like, "No, sorry, like you have to vote at the polling place near you." So, and that person was not like a young person, like they were maybe in their 30s or so. So, like no judgment, just like people like it's not a clear process. And then also like the relationship between like the physical location, people coming in, like that's also very confusing. People would think like, oh, we were given signs of like, oh, here, A through M, N through Z, except people would think, oh, that's their name. So they would like line up in the line that like their name was at, but the signs weren't very clear of like, oh no, this is address. So they sometimes come up to the line and be like, oh, you need to actually go into that line. We're trying to be good about people not having to wait again, but just all these little things, like parking tickets, people like not knowing like where to go at the entrance because all these locations are different. It's just there's like a lot going on and there's a lot of things to be confused by. So it's really, I think, a good thing to be sort of a patient, customer service oriented person that day. Because another thing that I learned was that people felt like you are in charge of the election. Like you're not just a volunteer, like a paid worker for a day. They like got upset or like afraid when they weren't on the rolls or like when their name was on the list. And they're like, why is the election held today? Like asking us. We're like, we don't choose the date. But yeah, just it like it's interesting to see the dynamic between like be on the other side of that, not as a voter. Um, a couple of the last things that I learned, like we were given 100-page training doc, emailed it. Training was not required. As you can probably assume, people are not going to read a 100-page doc if they don't have to. Um, so like everything, like sometimes you hear that, oh, like some poll place worker will be like, oh, you need an ID, but actually the policy is that you don't need an ID that year. But because the warden, who's the person in charge of the location, really trains you and tells you like, here's how things are, here's how to do things. If they tell you you need to check ID, like you check ID, even if they don't know. And it's kind of hard to be like, actually you're wrong. Because you may not know like personally because you didn't read that 100-page training doc. So there's a lot of variance in how much people know the policies, how up to date they are, because maybe IDs were a thing and now they're not a thing. You know, stuff changes. So definitely was trying to like be aware of that and how like the process is like built to function and be robust and like make sure that the least common denominator person can like work on it, not to necessarily be most efficient or like in case you were ever wondering why it's not just electronic check-in. The volunteers that I was working with was probably around 65 to 70. So we were all using like pencils and erasers and stuff. I like robustness, like if they hadn't figured out how to check in stuff, it would have actually probably gone a lot slower. Um, so all that kind of things, I kind of like, I'm just kind of absorbed all of that during, I think, one day of polling place volunteering. So maybe just last comments of like why I do it again. Um, I think one of the highlights was this like other young person came in and they were like, "Oh, this is cool. Like how'd you end up there like on the other side of the table?" And so I got to tell them, "Oh, like here's how I did it. Like it's actually not too bad. I got paid." And just like seeing other like occasionally another Asian voter was like, "Hi," because everyone else was not a person of color, and just being able to like see another friendly face, be that person for someone else, maybe like my mom didn't have. So there were just like little ways that I could like help improve the voter experience and just like being there. Being a younger person also, like people were like, wow, this is so great that you're here. Like we should have more young people do polling place worker stuff. And it like makes great people watching, you know, like some person coming in with their daughter, like couples voting together, dads and moms coming in with their kids, like all around, you really get a feel for like the neighborhood that you're living in. Um, so yeah, um I haven't done it since actually because I'm really not an early person. It opens at like 6. You really gotta like be there early. Um and you can't really have your phone during work, which is a little hard if you work from home or like you're trying to do other things at the same time. So just keep that in mind. And yeah, definitely like for all the things shared, it was really great to be on the other side and like would recommend, and Power to the Polls will tell you how to do that. Thanks, Caitlin.
Thank you, Caroline, for sharing that experience. I would love to be a poll worker. I'm pretty sure that when I've recently gone, they've told me that they're all set on poll workers. So I guess in my town, it's a hot gig, but maybe one day. But for the rest of you that are probably really interested in how you can become a poll worker and more about that, we have Marta Hansen from Power the Polls. Thank you for being here, Marta, and I will let you take it over.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Caitlin. And Caroline, that was fantastic. Thank you for sharing your experience and for teeing up this portion of the conversation so well. It's always great to hear that first person narrative of what the day in the life actually is. So hello, everyone. My name is Marta Hansen. I'm calling in from Portland, Oregon today. So good morning to you West Coasters on the call. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the National Partnerships Lead with Power the Polls. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what Power the Polls is, why poll workers matter, what poll workers do, and how you can activate to help address poll worker gaps in your own community. So kind of giving the zoomed out version of what Caroline just shared with us. So on the next slide, I would like to rewind to the summer of 2020. You may remember what the stakes were. As primaries started to unfold, we saw a crisis across the country. In Dallas, Texas, 10 polling places were closed last minute on election day because they didn't have enough poll workers. In Milwaukee, Wisconsin, they had 5 polling places down from 182 the election before. So there was this huge need and realization that we needed more poll workers all across the country, and something needed to change. So on the next slide, we had a nonpartisan coalition of businesses and nonprofits come together to answer that question, and Power the Polls was born. We are on a mission to recruit a new generation of poll workers like Caroline to ensure a free, fair, and accessible election for everyone. And it is really our vision that voting is a positive and empowering experience for every single person who goes to a polling place, that everyone who shows up has people who look like them and speak their language. We heard about Caroline's mom's less than ideal experience, and so it's our goal that she would actually have a wonderful experience and be able to be supported and empowered in casting her vote on election day. So on the next slide, in 2020, after Power the Polls launched, we had a huge amount of win. In less than 100 days, we recruited over 700,000 people just like Caroline, all across the country, and to sign up and support in their local polling place. We had over 400 partners, and by the time the general election rolled around in November, not a single polling place was closed due to a lack of poll workers. We're also we're on a mission to not only fill these gaps, but rebrand poll working as something that not just your retired neighbor does, but that everybody does. You can be as young as 16 in some places to sign up as a poll worker. So we've got a couple of folks on the screen here who helped us uplift the message and really make poll working cool, right? Something that anybody wants to do. And that's a real way to both get paid and also contribute to your community in a meaningful way. So on the next slide, what we really learned is that poll workers power our democracy. There is a direct link between poll workers and a functioning electoral system. Without poll workers, polling places aren't open and people can't vote. Without poll workers, democracy doesn't work as it should. Without poll workers, we have longer lines, we have a lack of polling places in some areas, and this disproportionately impacts low-income communities, communities of color, and rural communities. And so really, when we think about things like equity and access, and truly having a representative democracy and making sure that everyone's vote is counted and voices heard, poll workers are in many ways at the core of that. It takes about 1 million poll workers to run an election in an average year. You imagine, Caroline and the folks sitting next to her at the check-in table and scaling that out across the country. It does take about 1 million folks. So on the next slide, I've got a couple of just snapshots here in terms of why poll workers matter. Poll working in many ways is the most effective nonpartisan thing you can do to support our democracy. So poll workers enable the nonpartisan process of democracy, focusing on the process rather than the outcome. Poll workers allow polling places to be open, not just on election day, but for early voting as well. They ensure technology functions properly and effectively, including accessible voting machines. They prevent long lines. They provide voters with information in their native language or help them understand their ballot. And again, they try to make every person's voting experience a positive and empowering one. Being a poll worker is really about you and your neighbors, as Caroline so wonderfully described. So poll workers really, really do matter. They can kind of make or break the election experience, which brings us to this year. So on the next slide, we really have seen this year that in 2022, we are still facing a shortage, and the need really does exist. So Power the Polls is on a mission to do three things. We are recruiting potential poll workers with partners like Nonprofit Vote. We are connecting with the 5,000 election offices all across the country to get our ear to the ground really locally to figure out where the needs are. And then we're acting as kind of the go-between. So activating our partners and people who have expressed interest with those needs. So actually just today, I'm working on an email to go out to some of our partners in Florida. So for any folks in Florida on the call, Orange County, Polk County, and Palm Beach County Orange County and Polk need bilingual in English and Spanish poll workers for August 23rd. And then Palm Beach County needs some election clerks. So email me if you want more info about any of those, but we're able to get really specific. Yeah, Joan, I see in the chat you said Wisconsin. We do have quite a number of states that do have needs. So feel free, I'll put my email in the chat, reach out if you want to make sure that you're in the loop on where those needs are and what our rapid response looks like. Broad trends, we are seeing a need for multilingual, tech-savvy poll workers, and then also folks with availability for early voting. Okay, so that's the need. That's like the big picture of why poll workers matter. I hope I've made the case. And now on the next slide, I want to talk through what poll workers actually do. You heard a little bit of this from Caroline earlier, but basically you rise and shine, you're up really early to set up. Throughout the day, you help your neighbors vote, and then you are the last to leave, breaking down the polling locations at the end of the day. On the next slide, I've got some specifics here that include, I'm sorry, the fonts ended up a little wonky, but I hope you can still read it. So poll workers do a whole bunch of things throughout the course of the day. Everything from setting up voting stations and signage to checking voters in and distributing ballots, providing support where is needed for elderly neighbors, folks with different abilities, folks who require some language access or support. Registering voters same day, if that's allowable in the state, passing out I voted stickers, one of the most fun portions, and then again, breaking down the polling places at the end of the day. So it's really kind of overseeing and managing all of the complicated logistics from the welcoming folks and having it be a really good vibe, to also managing the technology and handing out the ballots to help make it happen. So on the next slide, if you are interested in becoming a poll worker, we'll have there are a couple of steps. So first and foremost is to complete an official application. I will drop this link in the chat in a moment, but you can sign up at Power the Polls and we will redirect you to your local jurisdiction's application. There are, instead of one big election, it's actually 5,000 elections all happening simultaneously, each run by their local office. And so each jurisdiction has their own application and process. So we will direct you where you need to actually apply. And then the second step is to be patient and also persistent. So if you apply, you may or may not end up being selected. Election officials want as big a pool as possible from which to choose. And so hopefully if you are selected for the general, you'll hear back in sometime in September. But continue to be patient, because last cycle we got some phone calls on Halloween from folks who wanted that quick turnaround for poll workers. So do be patient. And then if you are selected, you will need to complete all official trainings. Hopefully it's a bit more interactive than the 100-page document Caroline described, but even if you do receive that, please do read through it, because the most important thing is not only to have poll workers, but to have poll workers who are prepared and really ready to help their neighbors adhere to all the necessary rules and also have that positive experience. At Power the Polls, we do have some additional resources available, but trainings all happen with the local election office. And then last but certainly not least, if you are selected, you've got a big responsibility to show up and bring your snacks and do your job to make voting day work. So on the next slide, we do have a couple of eligibility considerations. It depends on jurisdiction, from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So on our website, you can find out what the eligibility considerations are specifically where you are. Sometimes you have to be a resident of either the state or county. In some places, you can be as young as 16 to help out as a poll worker. And then some states also have requirements around representation based on political party, but this really varies by area. Okay, so how can you help? You have been energized hearing from me, energized hearing from Caroline, energized hearing from the other folks on the call. We need you to help us power the polls. So you can sign up. If you are interested in being the next Caroline, sign up at powerthepolls.org/nonprofit-vote and share the link with family and friends. If you lead a larger organization or have a really big network yourself and are interested in spreading the word, you can reach out to me and become a Power the Polls partner yourself to help really mobilize outreach in your community. My big ask to all of you is to help us amplify Poll Worker Recruitment Day, which is next Tuesday, August 16th. And I will have some more information as to how you can do that. And then, as Caitlin alluded to a little bit earlier in the call, if you have the ability, think about policies that might help folks at your organization volunteer, not just going to vote, but volunteering as poll workers as well. So on the next slide, I've got a couple of things specifically for Poll Worker Recruitment Day, which is coming up, as I said, on Tuesday. We've got a fabulous GIF library and a bunch of really wonderful memes. So I encourage you to check all of those out and help us amplify on Tuesday. We're using the hashtag Power the Polls and hashtag Poll Worker Recruitment Day. So really helping us spread the word that this is a meaningful and important and nonpartisan and like deeply, deeply integral way to focus on the process of democracy itself. You are all the leaders within your community, and so you uplifting this as a way to get involved will go a long way. So the next slide, I've got my contact information and an opportunity to learn more. I'm going to copy paste and drop some information for further knowledge and engagement in the chat right now. So that should be in there. My email is there, as well as the link to sign up to be a poll worker yourself. And with that, thank you all for listening, and I will pass it back to Caitlin.
Thank you so much, Marta. So I see you got that info in the chat. That's awesome. And I want to recognize our next speaker and introduce Cannon Roberts from Rideshare to Vote Aware to talk about the other really important volunteering opportunity, making sure people can get to the polls. So Cannon, please take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Caitlin. I appreciate it. Yeah, so I'm with Rideshare to Vote Aware. We are the nonprofit arm of Rideshare to Vote. And so we focus on nonpartisan rides to the polls. And that is our main focus, is just getting out the vote. And so the way we do that is by recruiting volunteer drivers. And so that's what I wanted to talk to y'all today about, is these volunteer drivers. And so what happens is we go into communities. We are operating we're not in every state. So right now we're in Texas, Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, Ohio, Virginia, Nevada, Colorado, and Arizona. So we are expanding quickly. And we go into these communities, we recruit volunteer drivers, we then do a full GOTV effort where we make phone calls, we send text messages, we try to get connected with local organizations who know of communities that need help getting to the polls. And then as we start early voting and on voting day, we basically turn into a taxi company. And so we are just trying to get those voters connected with those volunteer drivers. So as a volunteer driver, it's really nice when you get on a webinar like this, and Caitlin was giving advice about how to best get volunteer interaction. And I was like, oh, are we going to follow those rules? And it turns out we do. Like we do follow a lot of those things. And so one of the great things is that we're really flexible. You tell us when you can drive and when you're available to take those voters to the polls, and we will, we'll work around your schedule. And so we know that when we get a request, we're only going to schedule you when you've told us that you're available. Now, depending on the size of the city, I am out in Lubbock, Texas, and so we are not nearly as big as Dallas. And so sometimes when somebody says, hey, I need a ride during early voting, and we don't have anyone scheduled because we're a smaller community, we can just send a couple of text messages and ask a couple of our volunteer drivers when they'd be willing to give a ride. And so sometimes it can kind of be that simple of just a text message. You say, yes, I can do it this afternoon, and we can get y'all connected. And so you can go to our website. I have the information there on this slide. Go to our website, sign up to be a volunteer driver. You will go through training. And so we will talk about, so we do have trainings. We do trainings every Tuesday and Saturday. And so it'll talk you through the process. It'll talk, you will learn how to use the app that we send you the rides. You get the map. You will meet some of our staff. We even do training. We do training about COVID precautions, and as well as just how to interact with the voters, because we are nonpartisan, and we want to make sure that we make everybody comfortable giving them the rides. And so we do those every Tuesday and Saturday. And so you can get through that training and then get signed up to start giving those rides. And so one of the things that I wanted to talk about is the importance of giving these rights. But before I say that, I actually also wanted to mention vote riders. We also work with vote riders. And so if somebody needs a ride to go get their ID so that they can register to vote, we also work with that. So you can help people get IDs so that they can get registered, and then you can also help them get to the polls and actually vote. But one of the exciting things, one of the things that I think people might not realize about doing this type of volunteer work is that it helps bring your community closer. And that is one of the things that I think in a lot of the work that I see, that we need stronger communities. And Caroline talked about this a little bit, even that when she volunteered, she was able to learn her neighbor's name. And so this happens when we give these rides. And so a lot of times, those of us that are looking for volunteer opportunities, those of us that are looking to help the community, we're not necessarily in close proximity with those who need help. And so we might not understand why they have these needs. And so when we hear about polling locations closing, or shutting down the drop boxes where you can turn in your mail-in ballots, we might think, is that really that big of a deal? But when you volunteer and you start giving these rides, you'll start hearing these stories about why people need these rides, why people need this service and need this opportunity. One thing that often surprises people is that they assume it's going to be older people that need the rides, and that's actually not our biggest that's not our biggest demographic of riders. Our biggest demographic are people with disabilities, people that need wheelchair accessible vehicles, as well as young people. We get a lot of college kids who can't vote on campus, and so they need to get off campus. They didn't take a car to college with them, and so they need help. And so we actually work with a very diverse communities, And giving those rides allows you to create relationships with these communities, to get in proximity with these communities. And Brian Stevenson talks about, in order to create hope in communities that are hopeless, we first have to create that proximity. And so once we have that proximity, once we build those relationships, we can start seeing hope spread throughout our country. And so this is a really good way of starting that, of building those relationships, of creating that proximity, as well as voting and encouraging voter turnout. And so I would really encourage you to visit our website, sign up to vote, or sign up to drive. We also have opportunities. You can make phone calls if that's more your style. And I'll just give a quick little sell on why making phone calls with Rideshare to Vote Aware can sometimes be easier. One of the things that's really helpful with what we do is that before we ask people for something, we are offering them something first. And so when we call people, and they tend to get annoyed that you're calling them, even though they answered, when we say we want to offer you a ride to the polls, even if they don't need that ride, that changes the entire interaction. And so I was on the phones last night. We're trying to get people out for the Florida primary. I was on the phone and I could tell that someone was she was kind of trying to interrupt me. She wasn't really paying that much attention. And I was just like, I'm gonna get this out. I'm gonna get my pitch out there. And so just very quickly told her what we were doing. I said, I wanted to ask if you need to ride to the polls. And I could tell that really shocked her. And she stopped. She went, oh, wow, that is a really good service. I do not need a ride. I will go vote. And so of course I said, would you be interested in offering rides? And so she wasn't interested in that, but offering that first, offering the voter something before you ask them for something, really changes that interaction around. So we do have volunteer opportunities to make those calls. And if you like chaos, we have opportunities in dispatch. Go on election day, we usually have all of our rides scheduled, but what will inevitably happen is that we will get a call from a rider who something changed, they have a doctor's appointment, they need to reschedule something. We will, one of our drivers might get sick that day. And so there's a lot of like rescheduling and reworking, and it gets very fast paced and a little bit hectic in the dispatch, but we also have that. However, our primary focus right now is trying to get more volunteer drivers in the states that we're active in. So if you have any questions, if you have any interest, please go to our website to find out more.
Thank you so much. All right. Well, Cannon, you did a great job, as well as you, Marta, because there aren't a ton of questions, but we do have a few. So I'll invite you to both stick around and answer a couple questions. And if anyone wants to ask more questions, our Q&A box is open. So earlier we had someone asking about the rules regarding whether you can have your cell phone and the training. So Marta, do you know, is that common to not be allowed to use your cell phone? Is there a way that volunteers could find that information out ahead of time?
That's a really great question. Yeah, the question had been asked in response to Caroline's story about having no in-person training and just the 100-page document and not being able to use the phone all day. It depends on where you are, and there's a really big range from jurisdiction to jurisdiction in terms of what training looks like, how far in advance it is, what the hours required are, what the pay is, and all of that. So there is a wide range. I'll type into the chat. If you go to powerthepolls.org/search, you can type in any zip code in the US and it will pull up the contact information of the local election office for that jurisdiction. It will also include what the requirements are to be a poll worker. I believe age requirements are in there, what the time requirements are for election day and possibly for early voting as well. And it also has the contact information for the local elections officer. So I will say, I'm guessing that you should probably assume that if you are working on a Tuesday that you would take that day off of work, because I imagine it would be pretty tricky wherever you are to try to, check emails on your phone, and also if that's the kind of work that you do, and also pay attention. I think really encouraging you to be as present as possible on that day is probably the best bet. But that hopefully that's information that you'll get in the training. And the one other thing that I'll add is at Power the Polls, when you do sign up through us, if you are selected as a poll worker, we have some resources that we share with you in terms of like, here's a list of questions that you should ask in your training, right? Things like, when am I expected to arrive? What are the rules of technology? What do we do if someone shows up who's not registered? How do accessible voting machines work, like things like that. So we try to help make sure that you are as prepared as possible to know what to ask when you go in for your training.
Thank you, very helpful. Cannon, we have a couple folks asking about states that I think rideshare is not yet in, including Wisconsin and Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
So, and we had someone ask about if you could you'd be able to share training materials, but in general, can you tell us about training materials and what you would recommend for folks in a state where your service isn't active yet?
So yeah, in the states where are certain, now I will say that Wisconsin and Pennsylvania are on our list. We have run a couple of elections in Michigan, and so we're kind of in and out of Michigan. And so one thing, in order for us to move into a new state, we need to find organizational partners and frankly donors. And so if we can find that support from individuals or organizations who would like us to come in and start operating in your state, that's kind of the first thing that we have to do is make those connections. If you if you want to help this time, one thing that you can do is get in touch with, usually the League of Women Voters, NAACP. Usually some of these nonprofits and organizations will also have requests. Sometimes they are like organized and they kind of do spreadsheets rather than having a whole software system like we're doing as we operate in all the different states. And so I would recommend getting in touch with one of those organizations, see if they offer rides. And that's usually helpful. Now, with the training material, our training, we do our webinars. I don't know how much of our training would actually help for people giving rides that aren't part of our organization, because a lot of what we're training on is how to use the technology. We do a little bit, like I said, of some of the interaction stuff, but that's pretty typical. It's a lot of things like, don't ask them who they're voting for. If they get in the car and they say, I'm going to vote for someone you don't like, you just say yes, and so it's more just about being able to discern between what's harassment and what is because we have had to ban a couple of riders, but it was the way they treated our drivers, not anything else. And so we do a little bit of that, but I'm not sure our training would be applicable to other rideshare programs.
Okay, well, hopefully we'll just get you active in all 50 states.
There we go. That's what we need. Yes.
Except the ones that, they have mail voting. And so don't quite need. Yeah, I know that, Marta, you're in a state where poll working and rides to vote are less relevant. But I really appreciate both of you. I think the last questions we had someone asking for the link for the National Voter Registration Day event grant application. I have just put that in the chat. And we did have someone ask about learning how to register voters. We did a joint webinar with National Voter Registration Day back in June. So go to the National Voter Registration Day website, check out the resources. There's a webinar recording on how to register voters there. And of course, your state website should have some information. Many states offer some amount of training. So as I've said multiple times already, but it bears repeating. Oh, interloper, sorry, folks. This webinar has been recorded. If you cannot wait until next week when you get the slides with all the links and information, we did live stream, so you could check out our Facebook page, and there is the live stream there. You could go back and watch portions that you missed or want to see again, or hold tight until Tuesday. Tuesday of next week is usually when the webinar follow-up goes out. Oh, got one